G'day, it's Tony from WorkGuru here, and in this video we're going to do a lightning quick walkthrough of WorkGuru and how you might use it for your construction business. In this example, we're going to do an example of a install of some solar panels and an inverter, but it's just a very generic way of showing you how the workflow can work for a construction or related industry. And so we're going to crack into it, and here we go. Alrighty. So starting from the time that you get a lead in or an opportunity becomes available, you can go to our leads dashboard and you can track the opportunity, or you can just track quotes. We're going to start right at the start, and we're going to add a new lead to track the quote, to track the opportunity. And so you can, against this lead, you can set a person who is responsible for tracking the status of this and to work to close the sales opportunity. You set the client that it's for. You can add a new client on the fly, and you can set a budget. The point of a lead is to be able to track your open sales opportunities before they're at quote stage. So you can track those ones, so you can measure what goes from lead to quote and quote to project. And you can track all the activities. So you can actually assign sales activities to different sales reps and track the email history. So if you've got a company address, that your company at workguru.email, and if you send any emails to that address with the lead number or the quote number, project number, purchase order number in the email subject, it will get attached automatically. The other thing that we can do here, obviously, is add a quote to the lead opportunity, and then we're going to set the budget and things for that a little bit more detailed. And so when we're building our quote, we've added this from the lead, and it's added the details that we already had, the name of the lead opportunity and the client who was on it, to the job. And then fundamentally, the things that we need to set are the elements that go into our quote. And in WorkGuru, these are tasks or products. A task is something that we put time against internally. So these will be your labor rates. So whether that's electrical, carpentry, bricklaying, concreting, tiling, whatever, or whether it's on the phases of the project. So it might be kitchen, bathroom, laundry, roof. This is all of our forecast labor hours. So whatever your labor type is here, you can set that up, and you can set a default price and a default quantity. A default sell price and a default cost. Products are anything that we don't put time against internally. So this could be items we use from stock, things that we buy, things that we sell, and even subcontractors that we use. So it could be an electrical subcontractor, it could be parts that we use, it could be the solar panels, whatever. So that's what the tasks and products are, and there are three ways to get them into WorkGuru. One is to type them manually, like I've just done there, which is a bit hack. The second is if you're running a takeoff platform. So if you've got a set of plans and you want to import the takeoffs from that, you can import those products in bulk into WorkGuru from your takeoff just by using a CSV import. And the last one, and probably the most common way that people do this, is by using a project template. And a project template in WorkGuru is just a preset kit, basically, of time and materials. So we'll do this one here with the retentions example. And we bring in the time and materials that we think we're going to use. Now, it's important to note that just because you've had it as a template, it doesn't mean that you're locked into using it. If you think this job is going to take more project management because it's tricky, or you think we're not going to need the consulting engineer, we can remove those items, for example, from the quote, and you're not locked in. If you think of the template as a shortcut to stop you having to type things out on a regular basis, that's a pretty good way of thinking about it. In the product section, we do have retentions held and retentions claimed as balancing entries. I'm just going to remove this from this example, but I wanted to leave them in there to show we do handle retentions. We handle them to the balance sheet, and we handle them depending on your setup for when you're recognizing the tax payable on those. So if you want a little bit more detail, have a look at the separate retentions video on that. And that's fundamentally all we need to build a quote: is what we're doing for who, how much labor, what are the parts, the name, the client, and that's fundamentally all. So from here, we're going to save and issue that quote. Now, by issuing it, we've locked it from editing so that we now can't edit that edit that quote without revising it. We can email it to the client from here. We can print it into our document templates, and you can set up your quote to look however you like, include your contract terms and conditions, include your logos, your bank details, all that kind of stuff. And using our email sending tools, you can also do things like send it with a quote signing link, or you can even send it with a payment deposit link and get them to pay a percentage deposit to accept the quote, which will create the project for you and create the invoice and do all the bank rec for you as well. All right, so let's accept and create that project. So when we do that, everything that was from our quote flows through to the project. The only things that we need to change are the start date and due date. So let's do this a very quick one. And the project manager. So we've gone from a sales manager to a project manager. On the project, we've also got a reporting category that is specific to Xero integrations. If you're running departmental reporting, you don't have to do that. If you're not, don't worry about it. You can then also put a client purchase order number in. If they've used that same PO number before, it will give you this little warning. It doesn't stop you from doing it, but it just warns you. The only other difference here between the project and the quote is that I can now schedule start and end date for the tasks as well if I want to. So anywhere you see this little plus button, there's extra items that we can do or extra options we can see. And so I can schedule the start and due date of these tasks if I so desire. And I can assign different team members to them as well. So when we save that project, that takes us to the project overview, and it gives us all of the details about what we're going to do, who it's for, and where it's at. The key things here are your activity, what we call our project profit widgets. And yes, you can hide the financials from the people that you don't want to see them. But the key thing here is that you can see your forecast versus actuals in real time for any kind of project that you are doing as soon as somebody's added a timesheet, a stock usage, a purchase order. And that way you can track how you're going against the budget on everything. Across the right-hand side here, we've got a set of tabs which give you a bit more of a detailed breakdown. We'll go through those after we've added some costs and some time to this job. So let's start by adding timesheets, and this is the least common way you'll do it. But if you go to add a timesheet to a task, you can set your start time and finish time, number of hours that we're working, whatever it is that you want to do, and add a note to that timesheet as well. If you have the approval process, you can approve your own timesheet if you have that permission. If you don't, then you can't, and you can just save that timesheet as a draft. 90% of our construction clients will do that on the phones. You might also use the kiosk app if you've got one tablet to run on site or a laptop to run on site. You can have multiple people clock in on that. But just to show how those timesheets go in, every time a timesheet goes in, it immediately updates the forecast versus actuals on the job. So now we're showing that we're 5 hours out of 22 on our budget, and we've spent all of that time on our electrical work. And as you can see here, it's the electrical work task that is filling up, and we're seeing the progress completion of that change. Now in the time tab as well, you'll be able to see the timesheets, who did what time, when they did that time, what the length was. If you've got permissions, again, you'll be able to see the cost of that timesheet. And the cost of that timesheet is worked out based on either the person who did it, if you give them a rate, or if you don't give them a rate, against the forecast cost of what electrical work costs us. So yeah, as it stands, the admin person who's done this is costing us the princely sum of $10 an hour, so it's calculated at their rate. On the next tab, we can see the items that we have forecast that we're going to use on this job. So we've got an inverter, we've got solar panels, and we've got some electrical subcontractors. Now, there's 3 ways to get costs onto a job in WorkGuru. One is to add a timesheet, like we've already done. One is to use things from stock. So if you were a solar company, you may have some of these things in stock. And we're going to do it, use materials here. So for everyone who doesn't keep this in stock, don't worry. You don't have to track this as a stock thing. You can track these as non-stock line items if you want to. So you can add things, for example, like kilometers travel. So if I add a kilometers travel, I'm going to charge $100, 100 kilometers travel, sorry. Any usage that I do on that job will go into the audit logs and then update your actuals versus your forecast and what you've used on each of those products as well. You can see here, because I've added the kilometers traveled that wasn't part of the quote, we're now over budget on that line item. So any budget that's over, either for the quantity that we've used or the amount that we've spent, we'll update the forecast versus the actuals and give you a little bit of a warning. So using materials from a stock perspective, if you keep stock, it takes it out of stock and allocates it to the job, does the balance sheet stuff in the background for you for your Xero or your QuickBooks or MyHub integration. If you don't keep stock, then it's just a theoretical cost. The other way that we can get things onto the job is to purchase them. So we can either create one purchase order for every supplier that's on the job. We can order just what's out of stock, again, if you're tracking stock, or we can just go and order the things that we want. So we can order the electrical subcontractors, raise a PO for that. We've got a default supplier specified, so that will automatically allocate the supplier for that if it's set in the system. And we've got a system issue date and we've got an expected date. Again, you don't have to use those that you can. And you can set different delivery address details on that PO as well. So when we've created that, purchase order, we can email that to the supplier, and obviously they're going to come back and do that work. When we look at the project now, it's allocated the costs to that purchase to the project, even though we haven't received the supplier invoice yet. We've created a purchase order. So you can now see when I hover over my costs that my purchases are $500, my materials are $49.97, and my total cost is $5,547. So it's updated my cost on the project and my profitability to show that we're a little bit in the hole on this job until we get some invoicing done. When the supplier sends you the invoice or receives the goods, you can receive the goods and the invoice separately. You can receive them together. It doesn't matter what order you do this in. So we're just going to receive them and get the invoice at the same time. The invoice date and due date populate with the supplier invoice number and the purchase order number to go through to your accounting system and create the accounts payable invoice. If you don't receive everything here, it will prompt you to see if you want to create a back order. We're not going to do that at the moment, so we're just going to receive everything on the purchase order. And if you've got a different quantity that you received or it comes in at a different price, just update it when you receive the purchase order. So you can always see what it was expected to cost you, then what it actually did cost you. And we will handle that on the project side. And then it will show you now that on those materials, our electrical subcontractors cost us more than expected, even though we used the same quantity of them. So keeps that is in a very clear method for you to be able to see where you're on budget and where you're over budget. Last little bit here is invoicing. So let's go and invoice this job. We can invoice deposits, we can invoice in advance, we can invoice progress claims, you can invoice individual line items. The simplest way to invoice is a percentage. So I can do a 50% upfront, or I can do, in this case, let's go and do a 100% invoice just quickly to see how we do it. If you've marked a purchase order as billable, you get a separate option to bill the purchase order here as well. Ignore that if you don't want to bill that. And because I've added this travel per kilometers, which wasn't on the budget, by default, that gets flagged as billable. So you never, ever lose the option to bill things that you used if they weren't part of your quote. So I'm just going to remove that anyway and go save this invoice. So that will create the invoice, which will then get sent through to our accounting system. Again, we're just running through this relatively quickly. We can make that invoice look however we want. So we can give it as a single line, just say, it's 15,000, please, or you can give it a breakdown between the line items or even the percentages of the line items that we've claimed on that particular project. Now, when we go back to the project, things are looking a little bit healthier. So now that I've invoiced something, I've actually made some profit. I've made more profit than expected, so that's a pretty good thing. But like in all construction projects, let's assume that something happens and people change their mind and we want to deal with a variation. So dealing with a variation is very, very simple. If you go to the actions on the project and you create a variation quote, what this does is it creates what we call a project group, which is an arbitrary way to group related projects together, in this case, a variation. And we can link those together and look at each part of that job individually and the project group as a whole. So what I'm going to do here is do a battery install on top of my solar panel install. And again, that will just add the line items to the quote that I've created previously. And I'm very quickly just going to save and issue that, create the project, set the project manager, reporting category, save that. And you'll see now that on the project page, we've got a link to this project group as well. So the project group now shows us the original solar system, which was the primary job on this project group, and the 20 kilowatt hour battery install, which is our secondary job or our variation on this. And these widgets are a roll up of those two particular projects. So you can look at them together and manage them individually. That's a very quick overview of the invoicing project purchasing costs for what we would consider a relatively basic construction methodology. If you want to know more or you've got any questions about WorkGuru, feel free to reach out to us via the website or the 1300 number.